In the previous video, we rendered out this test shot, which is almost looking like a daylight image. So what we want to do now is move more into the darker sunset tones, and we want to add some feature lighting to these pavilion elements, as well as some target spotlight lighting that's going to be pushing light up this building, perhaps up this facade, and some lighting around the top here so that we can view a more nighttime looking effect. So a couple of things that I don't like about this image is I think that our V-Ray HDRI is creating too much yellow light. If we have a look at the texture, if I click on M, you'll see that there is this yellow light here, and that's giving off this rather odd color here. So we're going to try to use a V-Ray Sky just as an alternative, and then you can go backwards and forwards and see what works best for you. The other thing we're going to do is we want to get more of the light of the inner curtain material, those city night lights, to shine through our facade. So we're going to look at brightening that using a V-Ray light material instead of the plain V-Ray material. So we're just going to go through each of the elements and do some basic setup. Let's start first of all with our sun. I'm just going to move it slightly to the side and lower it a little bit till roughly, move it down a little bit more. I think roughly around there, and let's set the intensity to 0.1. So then we have the sun in place. Let's go ahead and add some Omni lights. So go to standard light, add an Omni, and then in your front view just position it up slightly. I'm going to do one of these and then one target light, and then I'm going to pause the video and copy them around. I'm just going to show you the initial setup. You add shadows, V-Ray shadow. Over here, let's use a value of 5 and a decay of, which is an inverse square decay. This doesn't have to be that big. We can go about 4 meters. It should be more natural. And that is about it for this light setup. So let's go now into the front view and add some target lights, some spotlights, so target spot. And let's do one that's shining up the facade here. And since we're working with lights only, let's go here to our constraint and select light so that when we want to reselect, we only click on the lights themselves. Move that into place. Let's put that right up against our building. This is the target, so let's position the target towards our building and the light itself slightly away. So this could be a light that's on the ground, it could be a light that's perhaps slightly higher up. Perhaps we want this light up here. Let's for our sake put it here, and we just light up the building and get some lighting underneath here. So along with that light, let's look at some settings here. V-Ray shadow is on. Inverse square, let's brighten this since it has to get quite far. And let's also make a copy of that light, and let's add some more spotlights here on top. And right click to get that menu to select the target. And let's just look at it in plan view and move it here across to the middle. Maybe we can add one to each side. So since I'm doing this copying around, let me pause the video and I will copy the rest of the Omni lights across all of these pavilions, and I'll add a few more targeted spotlights to our building, and then we'll do a few more tweaks and material edits before we do another test render. So here we have that same image, just with the sun slightly lower and darker, as well as a couple more Omni lights that I've copied around, together with a few target lights that are pointing up at the building, and there are a few around the top here, just to give a little bit more illumination to some of the features that we're showing off. So the part that we're going to tweak now is the reflection image, which is currently the HDRI. We're going to swap that out for a V-Ray Sky to see if that works better, so we can get rid of this egg yolk color on the right, as well as we're going to increase the amount of light that the inner so-called curtain object is emitting from inside this glass tower. So let's go straight into that. First of all, let's go into our material editor, and let's choose we're going to open up by pressing number 8 our environment and effects, and you'll see here we have a V-Ray sky. So we're going to instance that across, and in our scene we're going to, in top view, select manual sun mode, and we're going to select the sun. Then here for the intensity multiplier, we are going to drop it down to 0.03 so that we can get a much more natural looking environment. And lastly, by pressing F10, we're going to go down to our V-Ray environment, and we're going to just drag that across and instance that V-Ray sky. So that should handle our environment. We'll give that a shot in another test render. And what we'd like to edit now, if we just press Shift L to turn off our lights so we can see a little bit better, we would like to have a look at this outer, or at least the inner curtain material. So let's go ahead through our layers here and select that material. If I can just find it here, it should be here called curtains. And that's this image here that we had of that city, that nighttime city. So we placed it inside a material wrapper so that we can control the GI emitting, but instead of a V-Ray material as the base, we're going to swap this out for a V-Ray light material. That's going to give us more of a nighttime effect where the color can now be that same bitmap. So the one we have here, Glass Night, and we can copy that same image down into the opacity slot. That giving us, it'll basically cut out the black parts so that only the lit up parts are emitting light. Let's just add a little bit more of the color there, and this we can drop down to 1 since we don't need as much GI being generated through the material wrapper, since the V-Ray light material is now going to be doing most of that work. So from there on, we can go ahead and set up another camera. I have already gone and copied this camera around to the back here, and I'll just show you some of these settings. I'll click on that camera. It's more of an aerial view, and I've gone and pulled out the focal length to be slightly smaller. So by pull out, I mean I've pulled out of the scene by zooming out rather. And here you'll have a look. I'm using a shutter speed of 6 and 200, so pretty much what we had before, except we might have used 10 in the beginning. So now I've pulled it down to 6 so that our exposure is slightly longer. The shutter speed is held open for a longer time, and our custom white balance is slightly yellow. This is so that we don't have an over yellowish scene. So it'll basically take all the yellow color coming from your sun, or not all of it, but just to the amount that is in this shade, and we'll basically convert that to being white so that you'll have a slightly cleaner image. So before I render this, I just want to go into my render dialog box, and let's change the width and the height to being a square. So let's go for a 600 by 600 frame, and by pressing Shift F on the keyboard, it'll give us an idea of what that is going to look like. So I'm going to press pause again, and as soon as we come back, we'll have a look at the rendered version of that, and then it'll be time to recap and to see what we've learned in this little video. So here's our render from the other side, and you can have a look at the changes we've made. Basically, the facade, you now have more of the lights coming through. If this is too much, you can tone that value down by going back into that material. And if, for example, you don't like all the colors, you can also edit the texture to desaturate it slightly if you don't want these reds or yellows or greens coming through. Also, you'll see that the sun has been brought down. It's slightly softer. You'll see that there isn't this yellow reflection from the HDRI that we had earlier. And you'll also have a look that even though, I mean, this is a small image, but it took only 6 minutes on the oldest machine that is still in existence in the rendering world. This machine that rendered this has got 2 cores running at 2.4 gigahertz each. So it is really an older setup that is still producing an image at 6 minutes. So if I had to do a full scale of, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 pixels, we're still looking at underneath an hour definitely for render time. So the last thing we want to do, even with an old machine, is go into a crazy render time, because that's not going to be constructive for our clients or our workflow. So the last thing I'm going to do is, just before finishing this video, let's have a look at how we can increase some of these render settings and then push out a slightly better quality render. So we'll do it very simply again. In our presets, let's go to medium or high. You can choose according to your computer specs. And in the light cache, let's put the subdivisions to 1000 and the subdivision size to 0.01. More or less the settings that V-Ray came in. Filter will be nearest. And let's go across to the settings. Over here, the noise threshold, we can multiply that by, or divide it by 10 by having 0.001. And if you can, and you could, you can increase the multiplier till 2 or even more if you like. Then there are a few more settings that you can get into by, I'm sure, going into more in-depth tutorials about render settings. That's not what this tutorial is about, but that is more or less the setup that I use to create a higher res image. Then, of course, you can just go and increase your pixel size there. So we're going to render this out, and the next video will be about the photoshopping. I will show you the existing Photoshop file, and I'll go through each layer with you so you can see how each of those layers have affected this image. And that will then conclude our entire tutorial about how to create this iconic set of towers in this Bay of Rio. So thanks for watching this final tutorial about the lighting and render settings. We've basically looked at how to tweak the light, sun, and materials, and we've opened this new camera up that we're now rendering for our final view in the last and now coming video.